What's up? What's up? What's up? We're back. Here we are, folks. Thursday night, Jig night. What's going on, everybody? I am Mike Murphy, Barracuda. This is Jig Squad Live and the Tackle Making Podcast, available on platforms now. I will have the show transfer over to all podcast platforms in the morning, but this is all about live chat and everyone out there tonight. So I missed you guys. Excited to see everyone. Lots of cool things coming up. Everyone's running through the house. Brian Chapman, Bass, Brian's Custom Tackle, Matt, South Jersey Fisherman, Michael Bradley, Tom, Ken. What's going on, Wisconsin, Ken? Guys, I'm really excited tonight. So Battle Baits is in the house, Flint Pierce. And I don't know if you've had a chance to check out the website, but as we're talking and you're in chat tonight, go open a webpage, battlebaits.com. Here, I'll throw up the thing. You have to, that's the Instagram here. I want you guys to take a look at some of the jigs and things that we're talking about today. And Flint's going to show them on the screen. He's got some really creative and cool stuff. And I'm really excited to have him on the show tonight. So welcome back to another live event. Or if you're listening on replay or in podcast form, welcome in your car or wherever you are at. We're going to get Flint in. Let's bring him in now. Everything works. Flint, can I hear you? You're there?
I'm here. I'm
awesome, buddy. Welcome to Jig Squad. How are you, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing great. Trying to stay cold in this Midwest heat wave that I think it's nationwide at the moment, but
it's been a hot summer. So like you guys down in Missouri, it's even hotter, but I know up by us outside of Chicago, it's been a hot summer so far. So, but yeah, here we are, man. So listen, as we get started here, first of all, I'm super excited to have you on tonight. I'm crazy impressed with so many of the things that you craft and design, and that's what we do. Flow, color, and design is Jig Squad. So, but as we get into this tonight, we're going to talk some juice. But tell us a little bit about you and Battle Baits and how Battle Baits came to be, and just your history in the jig making game.
Well, it's kind of a cool story, long story, and I'll do my best to not be super long-winded. But first off, I appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk.
Absolutely.
And be recognized. I mean, you have a phenomenal page, and I mean, it's humbling to be recognized in this setting. I love talking about it. I love the grind. I love the story. I love every bit about it, and the conversations that I've had with you leading up to this.
It was fun.
It's built my anticipation for it, and I mean, there's a lot of things that I want to share, and
sure,
I know that we're probably going to have a mixed crowd. I did my homework. I watched tons of your videos leading up to this, trying to figure out what I was getting myself into, and I know that there's a bunch of builders that are watching. There's a bunch of fishermen that are watching, and hopefully, I'm not a real tight-lipped guy. If I can help someone new and young in the industry, I'd be honored to do that. Right prior to jumping on here, I had a buddy from California that called and that had questions about painting, and so my backstory. So I'm originally from the Pacific Northwest, and I grew up in California.
A steelheader.
Yeah, in California, right on the Oregon border, town of 400 people, Gatsby, California, a little mountain town, and right on the Smith River, which is this pristine, wild, and scenic river in Northern California, undammed. Incredible salmon, steelhead, cutthroat fishery, and that became my big passion. It was hiking, snorkeling, fly fishing, and ultimately we were right on the coast as well. So bass fishing I guess within a 2-hour drive in any direction was untouchable for me. So I grew up ocean fishing. I grew up salmon, steelhead fishing, fished lingcod, snapper, just nearshore rock fish. But my passion was fly fishing and the ability to create stuff and go out and hike a river or creek and try and catch something
Mm-hmm.
with it. So I was fortunate. I come from a family of fishermen that got me involved in it really young. And
Okay.
I mean, I was probably 12 years old when I got my first little fly tying kit with a vise and a bunch of dubbing, and I had a chance to make a couple nymphs and go out to the river and try and catch some rainbows. And so ultimately that's where my upbringing kind of brought me, and ultimately I became a commercial fisherman later on in life and started crab fishing. Had an opportunity to run some boats in Alaska down around in the Kenai area, down around Homer, and worked for a cattle broker.
Nice. So a little bit of everything. Yes.
So I got an opportunity to go up there and halibut fish, lingcod fish, and then salmon steelhead and fly fish for dollies and big giant rainbows in the Kenai.
We don't see any dollies around the Midwest here, brother.
Man, it was just
unless it's Dolly Parton. That's about it.
Well, there's a heavy presence of that around Branson, Missouri at the
moment.
That's
correct. That's right.
So ultimately, I had moved from Alaska to Las Vegas, and I'd never been to Las Vegas. Got a job working in Las Vegas, and I moved there, and I just had all my fly gear with me, really. And I went out to Mead. I started walking the cliffs of Mead, trying to navigate and figure out how I was going to fly fish for bass. And I learned relatively quick that it wasn't something that I was going to be uber successful at.
How interesting.
And I had an opportunity. I have a bunch of family in Branson, Missouri, some phenomenal cousins that I'm really close with, and they live right here on Table Rock. And when I was in Las Vegas, I took a trip out here to come see them, and they got me into a club tournament. And this is 2008 at the time.
Oh, that was it. That was the bug.
I'm just being a competitive guy, and I think that's such a draw for fishermen of all ages. But it's a sport you can do forever. And I came out here and like I said, being involved in sports and taking off in a small clubby tournament and getting the opportunity to go out and compete against other people, it just ignited a fire in me. So I went back, started fishing Mead as best I could. It went to Bass Pro Shops, went to these places, bought a bunch of tackle and a couple rods. And I would go out on Mead and I would lug these tackle boxes around. And by the end of the day, all of my baits were falling apart. And so ultimately that was the way that I had got into making them. Was I would come back home and I would have these tackle boxes. I would have spinner baits and jigs, all this stuff that I had purchased, and everything had melted. The rubber collar had melted, or just from lugging it around and sitting on a rock while I was fishing. So
it's hot out there.
I had all my fly tying stuff from Alaska, and I started building baits back together. And as I lived in Vegas, I got involved in some clubs there just to learn how to better fish Lake Mead, which is an extremely challenging body of water. And that's ultimately how I got into building. Was I'd be on the boat as a co-angler with these guys, and they'd look at the baits and like,
what a crazy pathway. So Flint, I will tell you this, people's stories and who they are and where they come from is like a big deal to me. It helps me understand what their company's about, what their pathway in fishing was. And for some people, they don't care about that stuff, right? And that's okay. But I like that stuff. And the crazy part about this is, we're usually talking to guys that are, bass heads I'm a Midwest bass head, right? And then we once in a while, we'll get a mix of the East Coast guys, the bass heads up there. And we don't get as much of the Southern guys, which I want to try and venture into more of with Jig Squad. But just your story of being a Northwestern guy and being that scene. And then what do? You don't just come straight to bass. you go to like several hundred feet deep Lake Mead. Well, maybe it's not anymore. It's about half that,
Right.
if even that. And just what a crazy different way to fish for bass. I mean, you want to talk about learning how to fish for suspended fish and fishing bluffs and rock walls. That's a whole nother story. You did not get into this easily.
No, but what a phenomenal spot to learn too. I mean, I think that's a humbling body of water for anybody that's a lifelong angler, but to be introduced to it early on and have to learn. But at the same time, I think that a background in river drifting steelhead, in extremely clear water, or back bouncing roe for salmon.
Yep.
I think that there is, or fly fishing and nymphing, there is a feeling that it was easy to pick up for me, and you know, watching line and using very light gear,
reading water.
Yeah,
it's very interesting because it, you know, the old phrase of, you know, the grass is not always greener on the other side. Well, it always feels like it's greener on the other side. And what I mean by that when it comes to us and being jig makers is that if you're a silicone skirted jig maker, and that's what you've classically been trained as, your next Jones that you're looking for is learning how to move into hybrid or introducing fly materials or maybe a hair jig or a marabou jig more classically, right? And the thing is, moving from one to the other, you have no idea. And so what's interesting is you came from the reverse end of my pathway of how I started making jigs. And it's just interesting how we get to these spots about what we think about different things like color and what it looks like, and how we go about creating color in the designs we make. But very interesting. And then so you're in Vegas, but then you didn't stay in Vegas though, did you?
I didn't. I stayed there for 4 years and then went back up around my hometown, about an hour and a half away. My wife and I moved back there and started a family, and right Southern Oregon, real close to Shasta Lake in Northern California.
Yeah.
So very challenging fishery in itself, and around that area as well. So one of those things, I mean, just like you do anytime you travel and fish, I take aspects of Vegas and Mead and Mojave and Havasu and Powell, and then bring some of those techniques up to that area. And ultimately, I mean, Northern California, Southern Oregon's it's an incredible place. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's plagued right now with some water management issues, or water issues in general. I won't just classify it as management. That'll start an entire new debate in itself. But there's those traditionally very famous Oroville, Berryessa, Clear Lake, Shasta. They're in such a drought, and
so when you go back up north, you have not started battle baits yet.
No.
Okay.
No, not at the time.
Did battle baits start while you were still up north, or after you came to Branson?
So I didn't really start. No, it did. It started in Oregon. So I came back up, and I was fishing in Southern Oregon. I had the opportunity to get involved in some clubs there and work with some folks that were avid bass fishermen, and got me involved. And that was ultimately, I mean, I was never selling any baits. I just had, and it's funny you bring up hybrid jigs, because that was all I was making. I mean, everything was hybrid jigs.
That's it. It was a mix.
A lot of round rubber, a lot of marabou, a lot of bucktail. Some freaky creature, rabbit zonkers, and but at the same time, it was what I was able to be successful with down at Mead, and ultimately what really sparked it for me, there was one guy that in Southern Oregon that kind of pulled me aside that I had the opportunity to fish with. And he said, hey, this is a jig that I've been using for X amount of years. And the owner passed away. I need you to build them. So I went home and I built a couple and I took them to him and he said, I want 300 of them. And I said, man, I don't have
300.
I don't have a do it mold. I don't have means to produce this stuff. You know, I'm going to these sporting good stores at the time and I'm shopping in the fly tying section and buying pieces of round rubber that are that big for, you know, $3.
Right.
And so him really,
he got the juices going for you.
And he said, hey, listen, I'll go out. I'm going to buy a mold. I'm going to buy all the hooks. You're not going to have any upfront costs. I'll buy the paint. I'll do whatever you need to do to get this rolling. So,
and he wanted you, Flint. He wanted you because you could tie. That was your value more than anything else, because he couldn't do the tying end and put them together like that. I got you.
So that was ultimately kind of what got me going. And when I started was around the time that my first son was born. And so there was a year period that I called it Sawyer Custom Tackle, which was my first son's name.
Okay.
And then we had the surprise of twins coming 18 months
it's never
later.
One when it's a surprise, is it?
And then it was a battle to do anything. And it was like, man, I can't name it after one of my sons. So
you had to go elsewhere. You had to find a new name.
Well, and you know, the real like origin of where Battle Baits came from, I know that a buddy and I were down at Clear Lake and we were fishing and we were talking about building baits and he was trying to get, you know, hey, I want to get you into this store and I want to do this and
sure,
I want to help promote you here. And I said, man, it's just a battle. It's a battle to do anything because I'm so busy. I got 3 kids in diapers and it was like we started calling it Battle Baits.
There you go.
And so we're actually out on the boat, out on Clear Lake, and I got on the internet from there. I was like, man, the LLC's available, the website's available. We're changing it. So I made the call out there on Clear Lake.
That's so great.
Yeah.
And since then, so I mean, I know there's gonna be so many things that we talk about here tonight, but so tell me, when you first started making jigs and you so you're making what I call hybrid jigs, right? It's a mix of silicone or maybe it's even straight hair, who knows. But tell me what was the switch? Tell me the process of you moving into the silicone game, because to be honest with you, the predominant amount of things I see you making is the silicone jigs, right?
100%.
So tell me how that happened. Like, what was that change for you?
Well, I mean, I think ultimately as a business progresses, the first year, I think the only thing that I sold was round rubber and hybrid jigs that were round rubber and hair. And I still make hair jigs, and I still fish hair jigs. And I love hair jigs and have a ton of confidence in them. I mean, they're a phenomenal fish catcher all over the country. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, as the business has progressed, it's boiled down to a couple different decisions, and ultimately, probably, I would say, just as a single man company, and as a single pourer, painter, tire, website runner, everything, I haven't been able to expand it at all. And it ultimately came down to production, and the hair was a lot slower for me to produce. So the hair was the first to go, and it makes a big giant mess. If you're trying to knock out 400 baits in the hair,
I can imagine you'd get up and just breathe heavily and freaking be everywhere.
It's the silicone, the progression of silicone too within the past 10 years has evolved. And I think that just on the manufacturing side, what they've been able to do with silicone, they've made it a lot softer, but they've also, their printing capabilities as far as their glitter inlays or the printing on top of the silicone,
right,
has improved quite a bit.
I would agree.
And the same for Round Rubber. I mean, Round Rubber, livingrubber.com, Paul Bachman, he's an Oregon guy. He was only about 20 minutes away from me. I'm a good friend of him, the owner of livingrubber.com. Awesome company and guy. And I can't say enough nice things about him and what he's done to help me through the process. But, it's hard to get on the business side. It's hard to convince people that have not fished rubber to fish rubber. And because it's not transparent. I mean, it's a bland black, avocado green, a brown, a purple, an orange. And then you hold it next to a iridescent pearl with a red flash that has this glitter effect to it, and it's printed a certain way. When people look at it and go, it looks more like a bait fish. And so, if you spend, at least for me, spending more production time tying rubber and then putting it next to silicone, I would on the selling side, I'd sell 9 silicone jigs to every 1 rubber jig.
See, that's it right there. And what's funny is, Flint, let me add to that partly has become the madness of what Jig Squad is supposed to be about. That it's not even as much, and even though I've got guys that run businesses on, yourself included, right?
Yep.
It's more so about the love of the game a little bit, right? The design element and all those things, and teaching people what those things are, and helping people understand, well, there's proportions to things. Proportions matter, especially if you're a fly fisherman, right? Or a fly designer, that proportions matter more in fly tying than it does in even silicone jig making. It just does.
Yep.
And I think taking those elements and that language and starting to use this vernacular of how we talk about what we create is important. And what's funny is, if once you get somebody who is a designer, they're on the pathway of designing, I personally think now they're starting to see all the excitement from round rubber or any type of rubber or flat rubber or fine cut rubber. And now it becomes more of an exploratory thing in an experience. But you're right. At the end of the day, when they come out at ICAST and show all the stuff that's coming out, I laugh at some of these big companies. Who was it the other day that just put out, it might have been Berkeley, where they said hand tied. I go, Berkeley doesn't hand tie anything. I go, right. Is this the new thing? They're taking our jam, and they know what all you do, and they see it, and they're finding ways to accomplish manufacturing processes to do it. And basically they're stealing our everything we do. And I shouldn't use that word stealing. Anything that makes the jig game better, I'm all for. Now, that doesn't help you as a businessman, but you're running a business, and when you know that you're going to sell 9 silicone jigs to 1 round rubber, well, that is what it is. That's the truth.
I mean, it's a hard, and I went through it probably the first 2-3 years more so than anything. And I was and I still am. I'm a huge round rubber fan. Table Rock is gin clear, extreme finesse fishery, in my opinion. But round rubber, I mean, anyone that says silicone has better action than round rubber, or
right.
frog's hair, fine round rubber, or a mop jig, it is full of it. But
Right.
the hard part with it is with the silicone colors that are now available, and if you're hand tying in a certain method that allows you the ability to stack multiple colors of silicone on top and create these really unique multi-leveled colors, I think intrinsically it instills a little bit of confidence in people as well.
Oh,
And
sure.
and I'm just as much of a advocate for confidence. And I don't think it was you that I was talking to, but I was talking to someone about this the other day. He called and said, "Man, I can't believe that you spend the time to airbrush these colors on every single head, to basically to match everything."
Sure.
And he said, "It's the best looking jig I've ever seen. And when I hold it in my hand, I know I'm going to catch a fish." He goes, "Because those fish haven't seen a head like that." And I started laughing, and he was asking me, why I was laughing. And I said, whether or not that catches any more fish, probably not. I mean, I don't think that there's a fish that's so finicky that's nose down on a jig in
I
Table
get what
Rock
you're saying.
in 28 feet of water that says, "Man, it's a green pumpkin head," but he just lifted that jig up and there's a little bit of orange on the base of that jig, and I'm going to hammer it. I don't think that happens. But at the same time, I also get the fact that you hold something in your hand, you go, "This is going to work."
Yeah.
And I haven't seen a bait produced like this. I haven't seen this color before, and I know it's going to work because it looks like the forage in my water system. So they fish it more. They fish it
Yeah.
with confidence. They fish it more correctly, and ultimately, whether you're doing that with one of my jigs or anything else,
Mm-hmm.
intrinsically you're going to get more bites when you have confidence in something.
It's so true, because I mean, let's just walk down that path a little bit more. So now all of a sudden, it's funny. I say this about the kids when they're going to prom all the time, right? And they all get dressed up, and I say, that kids are good when it comes to, going to prom, because they play the part. They're dressed up, they feel good about themselves, their confidence increases. You start paying attention. Now let's move back to fishing. I don't want to talk prom. So,
I was
but
wondering where it was going. I was holding my
this
breath.
is the life of an educator, right? So, but if you're fishing and when you're getting dressed up and you're putting on a skirt, that's what I say for like jig making. You're putting on a skirt, you're getting dressed up. You want to look the part. You want to. That's why I say I paint the heads on when I make my skirted jigs. Now, if you are putting plastics on the back of a head, I don't know if I really need to paint them. I don't have to. And for many years I didn't, when we would fish the Great Lakes for smallmouth and throw in grubs. But the point is, if I'm going to take the time, and I believe that there's a flow of color in the skirts that I design, which is what I believe, I want the head to be accentuating that in some capacity.
Yeah.
And so you kind of, if you're going to take the time to put everything together, it's kind of like, you get me in a dress shirt, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to throw a tie on too. I want to do the whole thing. And so now you said something that brings up a question. So obviously, I'm sure that in time or over the years, you've powder painted jigs, but you've moved towards airbrushing as well.
Yep.
Talk to me about that a little bit. Are you doing all airbrushing on the heads, or are you doing a powder coat, base coat, and then airbrushing, or what does your process generally look like, Flint?
So I actually powder coat everything.
Okay. Same.
And all of my airbrushing is also powder coat. So I've just over the years, I've kind of developed a system to where I'm able to spray powder relatively efficiently. I know it's a spraying powder can be an inefficient way of application
Right.
when you see some of the automotive paints that are out there and the way that they have them lined up and spraying 500 at a time. I still do every head individually at the moment. I mean, I have in the last year, I've moved into some electrostatic application.
Interesting.
Which I absolutely love electrostatic. It's a huge waste of powder. And I haven't developed a recovery system that's been effective or efficient.
Your recovery system it's gone.
It's gone. That is 100% correct.
But you know what though, Flint? Let me ask you a question though, and without going into all the, so I'd like to talk about electrostatic painting as much as you're willing to go down that road, because I just don't know enough about it. I understand what it is. I understand the basics, but the question is, when you're doing it in such a smaller and finite amount, meaning, I'm not spray painting a sheet of metal, right? I'm spray painting a head of a jig, shorter burst, not as much product. It makes it the same reason you may think you're going to blow through a lot of paint. You might, but you're also buying paint in larger volumes then, correct?
Correct.
Right.
Correct. I mean, and anyone that's listening, I'm not trying to hide any of ProTech does a phenomenal job with their paints. I love ProTech. I've used ProTech forever, and I'll continue to use ProTech. The electrostatic side, Prismic Powders, they're an Oregon-based company as well. They have 12,000 colors that are available, and they're an awesome company.
You just have a diversity experience that you're able to access with it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I've said doing this for a decade, mixing a lot of ProTech colors and trying to create your own and be consistent with it over time with certain recipes. And the electrostatic side of it is, I wouldn't be able to afford to electrostatic do it, or CS powder coating paint. It's too expensive.
Let me ask you a question, Flint. Okay, let's stick with that for a minute. So if I'm just you and I had talked about this before. There's also a difference between what the capabilities are of the hobbyist and the more production end of things. So would you say that electrostatic painting is even works on the hobbyist end of things, or is it? You get what I'm saying?
Well, yes. And I'll tell you, I don't know if it works on my scale yet.
All right. Duly noted.
Because I haven't figured it out. I mean, it's hard. One of the things that I run into constantly is scalability with my own company. Obviously, I don't want to be tied to a vice for the next 50 years of my life, working 7 days a week trying to keep up stock. So I ultimately, I'm constantly trying to find ways to increase productivity, but not jeopardize the quality aspect. And that's a hard thing to do. And I was exposed to this electrostatic concept. And I know that there's people out there that have it figured out, and I know that they're very tight-lipped about it.
Right.
For me, it's been something that it's just been a progression. I mean, it on the hobbyist side, I would say no. I think that for me to run one base color through an electrostatic machine, I have to do a minimum of about 300 heads.
Yeah.
And
that's what I'm getting at, right?
But it's an incredible finish. It is only single color. So to add those the back straps or the throats or anything else that you're going to accent color, you got to go reheat those heads back up and have that paint available to adhere to the next color, which I do. But so I don't know if I'm, there's certain products that I have that I actually have two different parts of the head that I have to heat at different times if I'm just using a fluid bed. So the ability to electrostatic that head can coat the entire thing in one process. The issue with electrostatic is anything that's exposed is going to get coated. So you have hook points. If you're doing spinner baits, you have wires. So you end up trying to figure out how to keep those areas paint free. And I've been through different processes of trying to build racks that are going to prevent powder coat from going in. Yet you want multiple units on the same current so that electrostatic is going to powder coat multiple items at the same time. So it's a giant learning process, and by no means do I have it figured out. I love the end result. I mean, the end result is incredible. It's very consistent. On the smallest heads with a lot of detail, you can pick it all up. I haven't ran into something to where I haven't had enough powder, and I don't know if that's current driven with the electrostatic process, if I've just been able to get that right, but I haven't had like an overabundance of powder that's going to make the heads gloop up, or not enough powder to where I'm having to go redo it. So
interesting. So yeah, I was happy you brought that up, because it's like, I mean, I'll be honest with you, it's a conversation that I've never had. And in the times when I've gone down the video wormhole of trying to watch videos, just learning about it, I'm looking at metal fabricators and all these other things. And I eventually get to the point, I'm like, yeah, it sounds cool, but I'm not going to do that. You know what I mean? Just for me being a guy that the hobbyist, I don't want to miss this question. So Brian's, my good friend, Brian Cole from Brian's Custom Tackle. Brian makes he ties a lot of nice jigs too. And he asked the question, what's your favorite thread? Which is interesting, because you and I were talking about that today. So we might as well talk about that. So you're tying your jigs. So
I use Kevlar, 100% Kevlar. I mean, I know that there's a lot of different. When I started, I used braided line. I used I was pulling. Sorry.
No, you're good, bud.
Popping up on my phone. I used braided line early on. Kevlar has been something for me that has just always worked, and I like putting a whole lot of pressure on my wraps when I'm doing it. It's funny. Everyone kind of makes fun of me. I got a bunch of buddies that I talk to throughout the day, either on the phone or on FaceTime when I'm tying, and I have all my fingers wrapped in duct tape because, and a lot of times I'm surprised I don't right now, but
I think it's great though.
Kevlar is a beast. I mean, it is something that I can pull on as hard as I possibly can.
Flint, let me ask you this. So I've never worked with it. Two, I've heard about it plenty. And then, so I guess the third part is asking, what is the, let's just say, diameter? What would it be comparable to?
Extremely small. And that's why I like it.
Like we're talking like under 100.
Yes.
For sure, under 100.
There's not a lot of buildup with it. It's just a clean thread, and it's been well, I'll tell you, the last time that I bought fly tying, I left Alaska 15 years ago, so that was really the last time that I dove into the fly tying world.
Sure.
I went, when I started tying jigs, I don't know if I was tying with 210
Yeah, a lot of guys start with 210. I mean, I just literally started going lower on my bass stuff. I'll tie flies with smaller stuff, but I just went down to like 6-aught, which is like what, 130 denier.
Yeah.
136 maybe to be exact, whatever my uni one is I'm using.
And ultimately the way that I got involved with Kevlar was livingrubber.com. Paul Bachman, the owner. I went through, and I was trying, muddler minnows and big streamers for dollies and big rainbows up in Alaska. And I was putting a lot of pressure on the thread when I was tying these flies and never running into issues. Mm-hmm. But when I was trying to wrap that round rubber tight enough to where I could pull it,
you were cutting it
and cut it.
Yeah.
I was always having movement. So I would try and wrap tighter and tighter. And because I had a fly tying background, I saw the comment question pop up earlier about wire tying or wire wrapping opposed to hand tying. And I know that those names are interchangeable. Since I had a background in fly tying, I just never picked up wire and explored with it. I mean, I know it's a phenomenal option for round rubber because you can get it extremely tight, but I was running into those issues, and Paul Bachman, Living Rubber, said, "Hey man, you got to try this Kevlar stuff." And I remember the very first time pulling on it, and it just cut me like butter or on my finger. So I've stuck with it ever since. And I know it's a little more expensive, but I can't remember the last time I pulled on it during a tie and had it break and have to cut stuff off. I mean, it's just efficient for me this time.
I mean, there's guys out there that will not use thread. I'm just for the sake of it, I'm just going to include Kevlar in that category of any spooled type of tying material. That's not true because wire technically is spooled. I can't use that description, but I will say the only time for myself that I start pulling out the wire is when I'm going back and redoing old jigs of mine that had the skirts on them that are 15, 20 years old, that some fell apart, some stay together, but now I don't want them to fall apart. I don't want to take the chance. So I go back and I just add wire in, and I only do it because I thought, I go, well, I got to stay on top of practicing how I wire wrap. And I don't know why, it's just, that's the way I've done it. But if I'm tying any type of mixture of silicone in with other types of material, then it's always thread tied.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead.
Now I was going to say, there's been people and buddies in the industry that say, hey, you got to explore this stuff. You got to at least entertain it so fast. And I've watched videos of people that they'll post it wire wrapping, and it's, I don't know if it's just because I'm very inexperienced in it.
Yeah. But if you're using more, my thing is, I think that wire tying is easier to do for the layman that isn't used to tying, tying knots and finishing it off, or even putting half hitches on something, or some of the more technical, or a whip finish, You don't have to know any of those things to use wire, and you could get in the game. You could have a mold and dip some jigs and throw some skirts on there, and you don't need to be. There's not much more to it, so it's functional, it's efficient, and I just think the more people are involved in more fly type tying materials, or including those, they come from the other angle where they'd rather tie it in,
Right. Well, I mean, I know they both have. There is some significant pros to each, and there's cons to each, and I've seen people produce a whole lot of baits and quality baits in a short order with wire. My personal, I do a lot of stacking of skirts and just meaning not using 3 tabs and putting them together and tying them on. I really try and, I mean, there's certain patterns, rainbow trout patterns that I have 9 different silicones that I use all within that one. It's complete overkill and it takes me way too long to tie, but it's such a good finished product. And I wouldn't be able to achieve that pattern if I was limited to 1 or 2 wraps with wire. So
yeah, I get what you're saying.
Being able to wrap individual colors in certain places, really with thread, it's a no-brainer for me personally.
So I'll add to what you just said. And so basically just probably saying the same thing, just slightly different. So for anyone out there, if you're new to tying, right? And let's say that you're going to put 2.5 skirt tabs, which is the industry average, right? 2.5 skirt tabs and whatever, people, all different amounts.
Yep.
2.5 skirt tabs are going to go into your jig and you're going to lay it on half and half. It's actually, let's just call it 60-40 because you're going to have a fold back and you're going to lay your material on, then you're going to lay your order of materials on. And then if that's it, then you can wire tie and then you're done. I mean, it's not, there's not that much more needed, but when you're pulling out a fifth of a tab or something like that, and you're trying to get it very specifically placed on where you want it, and you want to be more meticulous in terms of where it's placed on the color stacking, that's when you have to tie, because if you try and wrap wire around while doing that, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work as precisely. If you have full tabs, it's very easy to wire tie, right? Yep. And it's going to fall. It's going to intersperse amongst the colors, some on top, some on bottom. But when you want it very specific where it's at, you have to hand tie. And to be honest with you, most people starting off shouldn't even have to do that. Here's the other thing that's happened. Carl, welcome. The other thing that's happened is, and Flint talked about the living rubber and how it was real basic in terms of colors, right? Well, the other thing is that over the years, the skirting material has been pretty simple. Then they'd get into tiger tracks and blotching and all these different types of things. And those were kind of cool. And now some of the skirting material is literally, it's almost done.
Right.
A lot of tabs themselves could be a jig all in themselves of 100%. Just 2.5 tabs. And a lot of people like making jigs like that. I personally, I look at jigs like that. I don't mind them. I go, wow, like nice color combo. I would never make a jig like that myself because you guys got to understand the Jig Squad thing to me was about flow of color, right? So I don't want somebody to flow my color.
Right.
I want to flow my own color. I want to put it together the way I want it. But there's a lot of people that like it already made like that. I've seen some purple, like Junebug and different colored ones that I'm like, man, I saw one that was like a bullfrog. And I'm like, wow, that skirt is fantastic. I love it. But I like making my own. Like I like making my own and putting my own skirt colors together to make that bullfrog as opposed to singularly having it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Some guys get their joy out of making that jig, and that's what it was. For me, it's kind of like I didn't have those cool skirt tabs back in the day. And so George Val, welcome, buddy. GSP, here's a good question. So George asked Flint about GSP. So the only comment I'm going to make, George, and this is limited for me, and Flint's probably going to be able to answer this better, and Brian Schmidt's in chat, he can answer too. But the thing with GSP is there's less stretch, right? And I personally am not used to that. When I had less stress, it was moving up the big fly thread, 400 and something here, or using 210 and I had less stretch. But GSP, if I'm not mistaken, gel spun poly, whatever the heck it is, there's no stretch to it. Is that correct? Do you know Flint?
To no, because
Brian will know. Brian Schmitz in chat, he'll know. And Brian's custom tackle might know too. I have not used it, George, because I didn't believe it to be as forgiving, right? And I thought I needed something a little more forgiving because I'm not that A-level tire, right?
And there is almost no stretch in Kevlar. And
that's why I was going to say, if I'm saying the right thing about GSP, it's the same thing as Kevlar. There's no stretch.
Right.
You know? Yeah, Brian Schmidt saying no stretch in the GSP. So I would imagine it would do similar types of things. And Brian and then Brian Cole says, yeah, 210 has a little stretch. And actually, I remember you saying this, Brian Cole. He actually likes the GSP because you could really crank down on it. And so similar to probably what you're describing with the Kevlar.
Yeah. Well, and I think the only reason I haven't ventured out is I've never felt the need to. I mean, I've had so much luck, success with Kevlar over the years that it's never been something that I've thought, gosh, I need to look at a different avenue. I mean, the only downfall to it is that it just tears my fingers up. So
yeah. Here's a good question. So Will Junkin says, what if you have a jig that has a rubber band on it, but want it to last longer? Would you recommend wire over thread for a newbie? Will, that's exactly when I use wire. I actually will go back in. And if you ever need anything, Will, just message me on Instagram, and I'll give you my phone number and I'll walk you through it. That's when I use wire. I have so many jigs and more chatterbaits. I have a lot of chatterbaits that were made back in the day before all the patent stuff kind of came out with Z-Man. And I still have tons of chatterbaits from back in the day. And I basically had one fall apart on me at the pond about 2-3 years back. And I frustrated me so much because I didn't have another chatterbait with me. So I said, I'm going to start wire tying. Well, it was rubber tied. It was just I went back into all my jigs, and I still have more to do, but I go back and I literally will tie right in front of it. And I'll wrap the wire around. I got 26 gauge wire from the craft store. And I wrapped it around a couple of times and I twisted it up. And afterward, on some of them, I didn't even take the old rubber the collar off. Since then, what I'll do is I'll take a little razor blade and I'll just push down on it gently, and it'll break in half, and then I take it off. But anyway, Will, that's how I kind of do it. Brian Schmidt just made another good comment. So GSP is more flat as a tying material as well. So interesting. Yeah, the thread stuff is there's so many different things on the thread end of stuff. Listen,
there is, and to your point, when you were just talking about wire over thread in reinforcing existing banded jigs,
yeah,
I wouldn't be able to tie with thread if I was competing with tabs that were separated.
yes,
and you had all those strands. So it would be a nightmare. And you get people that will want to do. I've had people that have wanted me to reinforce certain stuff, and I've tried it, and it's impossible.
It's kind of like remodeling, where you're going in to fix something up after it's jazzed up a little bit. It's almost easier to start from scratch and new. So, good discussion on the thread talk. I have to bring up some jigs because you have some crazy good jigs, and there's one. The thing that I'm probably most excited about is I don't even know if it's a jig, so I'll wait on that. But talk to us. Go ahead. You just go.
I hope I brought it up here because I was late getting home, and so I was doing my best to get the tripod set up, and
it's all good. You're talking about the Cyclops?
Yeah, I was talking about the Cyclops. I grabbed some prop heads. I grabbed some other underspins, and
listen. If you don't show the Cyclops, that's fine, but I'm going to talk about it later anyway.
I would love the opportunity to talk about the Cyclops. I know
you pick what you want to talk about. So guys, listen here. You guys know I do my little pauses where I have like a Jig Squad declarative statement to make here. So here's the thing. I love everyone who comes on this show, right? I love everyone who comes in the chat. Most everyone. There's been a few screwballs, but I love everyone who is part of the Jig Squad experience, right? Well, here's the thing. As designers, I like so many different things, and I appreciate everyone. And one thing is not better than the other to me. But there's some things that Flint Pierce, Battle Baits does that isn't, like a couple of things that are different that I don't see a lot of other guys doing. And I know it's not that there's no one in the industry doing it. But like as an example, one of the things is he's got like a drop shot jig. You have them with you? Are they in front of you? So there's two things. There's two things for all the jigs, the colorations and everything are phenomenal. But there's two things that I'm most intrigued by, even though probably all his other stuff is cooler. but for me as a jig maker, these are the two things that I'm intrigued by because they're different to me. One is he's got a drop shot jig, and then he also has this other, like, it's like a prop. I'm just going to call it a jig. It's like a prop. No, it's not like a prop jig. It's this prop, and he calls it the Cyclops. And I just want people to look at this stuff. It's so crazy. So did you have these in front of you?
I grabbed some of them, and I'm sure that we're gonna
talk about whatever you want because we're gonna get to it. I know, but those are the things that are exciting me about Battle Baits.
Well, I mean, and truly the progression of a lot of that stuff is over years and years. I mean, and you're a builder. A lot of the people in here are builders, so they understand it. And I'm not talking to a naive. I'm sure that there's a lot of people, including myself, that has stuff in the works that no one knows about, hasn't seen. I mean, and I have an entire shoebox full of stuff that hasn't worked out that I'm still working on. The drop shot jig is kind of interesting because you touched on it in a previous podcast that I listened to on here. We called them shrimp fly rigs, and fishing snapper, lingcod, deep. We'd have a big giant 12-ounce jig head and a scampi on the bottom, and we'd have basically big shrimp flies for snapper and fishing out in the Pacific Ocean. And basically it's a drop shot, right? It's a drop shot jig to a certain degree.
Right.
And it was the drop shot jig. And like I said, I heard it from you on your previous discussion was, talking about trying to locate fish. And this is long before live target or anything else, but, having one or two drop shot hooks down to a jig down on the bottom as basically as your drop shot weight, locating, okay, it's hitting that top one at 6 feet off the bottom. We're going to start drop shotting, or we're going to hit the jig. We double up doing it a lot of times. I know different states have different regulations and tournament circuits have different regulations. But
12-ounce weight, 12-ounce weight on the bottom. Like for the salt water. Like it would be like the weight would be like in the surf or in deep water, and salt water is what he's talking about when they would use the big old weights like that.
Yeah, and we were fishing. I mean, a lot of the stuff when we were using those rigs, we were 120 feet. I mean, the current out where I was at in the Pacific wasn't real extreme, but then you get up into Alaska with the big giant 20-foot tidal changes. I mean, you could be in 40 feet of water and using 6-7 pounds just to stay on the bottom in 40 feet. It's just insane. The title rips there, but I'll go down another rabbit trail if I'm talking about that. So ultimately, it was the drop shot jig was something that got played around with originally at Shasta Lake, and going down with a buddy, and we were hitting fish on these jigs, these micro jigs that I built, and we ultimately ran out of trailers, and wind was blowing like crazy. So we fashioned these micro jigs with
awesome
big giant, they were Carolina rigged sinkers underneath it, but basically to get these micro jigs down. And it kind of just started evolving that way to where, and we're talking vertical fishing. I mean,
right.
Casting them out because they're still a metal head. Originally, my first design was lead with them, and now I've gone to tin bismuth just so I could reduce the overall weight. Now it's down to, I think, a 5/32, being that it's constructed out of tin. And I went through a whole bunch of different designs with it. I had an internal swivel built into the head originally, and trying to reduce the line twist with it. But ultimately, what we were able to find out with it was the fact that it was actually weighted was preventing the line from spinning. So I get that a lot of times. It's like, well, why don't you tie directly to like a spin shot hook or just a drop shot hook? And I tried that in the past. I've worked with resins in it in the past. The resin weightless head created all the spin that you
a lot more spin. Yep.
So as strange as it is, having the weight actually stabilizes the bait.
Show that again, Flint. So basically,
so yeah,
the head is everything in this thing. I mean, the jig looks great. Let's be honest. But notice the main feature here, folks. There's an eye. It's like an eyelet on the top and bottom.
There's actually two eyelets. Yeah. So there's a tie point. Let's see if I can get it to focus. There's a tie point on the front and a tie point on the back. And I've had a whole bunch of discussions with people. My original one that I'd prototyped out of resin actually had the slip point on the bottom where you could.
It was like a groove that the line would fit into.
Correct. And I ultimately dropped that design because I like throwing a jig underneath it. I like dragging a 1/2 ounce jig or a 5/8 ounce football jig. Main lake points. Obviously, it's a tricky rig, and if you're fishing brush piles or something else, it's going to get spindy in a hot minute. But if you can fish main lake points, or pea gravel with it, or if you're vertically fishing, it's a phenomenal way to put fish in the boat. And it's just weird. I think it's a unique, different look that a lot of fish haven't seen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have comments on this. So, but I have a question first. So my question is fit and function of fishing this drop shot jig. So everyone who's on the live chat or going to watch this on replay on YouTube, you're visibly going to see this, or you can go to Battle Baits and you could see this, what the jig style is like. But if you're going to be listening on podcast, understand again, this has got a line tie, a 90-degree line tie on top, just like a jig, and then also one on the bottom. So it's basically creating like a line through type of feature. Is it two not tied, or is it a line through? What is the way that is tied?
I tie to the top and I tie to the bottom.
Okay. So it's a separate piece of line, basically.
100%.
So there's a terminating point on the jig, and then the next eyelet on the bottom becomes another line tied on.
Yes. And I'll have to, I know that getting these cameras to focus and function in this setting.
And people could go on the website and look too,
Yeah.
and you could see it.
Yeah. And what I tried to do, I mean, because it's a very unique concept, I try and at least rig them and have them presented this way.
Yes.
In the photograph, just so it makes sense to people. But if you're on Instagram or on Facebook and you go through my archives of previous videos, I have some underwater footage of it, and
yeah,
it's a cool little bait. I really, being here on Table Rock, I'm the Pacific Northwest, and a lot of finesse fishing there on the Columbia River, the Willamette River, but Shasta. I had a ton of success with it, and I think that it is one of those things, like we were talking about with confidence earlier.
Sure.
Fishing it next to the original time that we had crafted this bait together when we were fishing, the skirt was drawing so much more of those vertical bites than the actual trailer was. And that's why we had rigged those egg sinkers, and we were trying to just get that jig down, but the wind was blowing so much. And I had really just believed at that point in time that I was onto something, and that a lot of those fish that were being targeted,
Sure,
in 40 feet of water, suspending over 120 or 140 feet off these main lake points, hadn't seen a whole lot of baits like that. And the way that they were reacting, it certainly made us believe that there was a need for it.
So Alf, Mr. Palin himself, is asking, when will Magic Edge, Pro Shad, and Natural Green be back in stock? He's obviously a fan.
It is. I'm hoping to knock all those out this week. It's, I have a unique problem, and it's a phenomenal problem, but I cycle through trying to get things in stock constantly, and I build 20 to 50 at a time of a certain color. And the problem is, like, let's say the Magic Edge color, if I have 8 or 9 people that are signed up on the website with a back in stock notification, that as soon
they're gone as soon as you,
oh my goodness,
stock them.
It's and then as weird as it is, I mean, I have times that there's 12 people signed up, and I put something on there and they don't sell, and you're like, well, did those emails even go out?
It's funny.
It is.
So here's my comment, Flint. So my comment on the design element of that drop shot jig, and the reason I think it's so special, is that it's not complicated in theory, right? And the interesting thing is, you do not see, guys, listen, somebody, you could call me out on this. I just don't care. I'm making the point that there are not a lot of people out there, companies, that are making suspended jig type baits in this fashion, to this drop shot jig on the market. And I'm not saying no one else does it. I'm just saying you don't see it much at all. And the reason that's cool is because now you're talking about this hand-tied, skirted type jig that's suspendable, that isn't normally something that you see, or something normally that people use on a drop shot. And frankly, if people are doing different things on drop shots, which is kind of like a fad, or it's been a fad on and off too, whether it be with tying materials or whatever it is, there are a lot of cool things that people do with that, but not a lot of people do that either. But you definitely don't see somebody doing that a lot with just jigs of this style. And that's why I think it's really cool. Oh, hey, I got to give a little shout out. Hola, amigo. Sanuelos is a guy that I've been going back and forth with some messages on Instagram, and I appreciate this gentleman tremendously. I think he's a young guy because he's from Puerto Rico, and I kind of have a special place in my heart for Puerto Rico, and I appreciate the fact that he's here. Whether your English is good or bad, brother, I appreciate having you here, man. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's so cool, and that's kind of like that's what this drop shot jig kind of like excites me. That's kind of it, you know.
Well, and I know, like you said, I know that the concept itself isn't unbelievably new. It was just something that, you know, ocean fishing and being successful, or nymphing and having dual rig when there's so many different applications for locating fish at different depths.
Yeah.
And ultimately that's what it drove it.
I'll go as far as to say, even though I catered my statement earlier just to appease any naysayers out there, right? I don't know anyone else that's doing a drop shot jig tied in that capacity. I'll be honest with you. I actually saw somebody who did a drop shot jig that had a 90-degree vertical line tie on it and no other eyelet on it at all. It was just like a 90-degree jig, and they called it a drop shot jig. And I went, what?
Well,
I don't get it.
I've seen them before. And I know this is probably going to strike a chord with a lot of people that are
go ahead, let it ride, because I agree.
Are builders in here. But you know, it's a community, and it's probably something that is a frustration for a lot of the other guys that are builders in here as well.
Sure.
I mean, before that drop shot jig hit the market, I think it was probably 16 months from the first one that I went and just chopped up a do-it mold, trying to figure out a way to make it work, to having a mold made. And like I said, I was pouring resin. I was trying swivels, trying different hooks. I mean, I think originally I had bought 10 different, just from lure parts online and Barlow's, just buying 10 different finesse hooks and trying to figure out the best shank size and degree line tie, anything and everything to make this thing work. And I released it, and within about 2 weeks there was 2 other builders that had basically cut their do-it molds, and they put a little drop eye in the back side of it, and it was like, drop shot jigs now available. And you know, that's a hard thing as a builder to swallow. When you put so much time into it, and the design, and as simple as it does look, to get knocked that soon. But it was kind of an interesting thing, because I got approached by a couple guys that had bought those, and they said, man, I don't know if do yours work, because I bought these other ones and they were all over the place. It was constantly wrapping on the hook, and I had all these issues with them, and they were so heavy. And you know, so I was able to, I mean, it did a disservice to my product, because these guys had rushed it, and they thought it was just throwing a eye in the bottom of a jig head and winging it. But you know, I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there that have experienced that. But with any design, I mean, I think just advice to young builders, because I've done it. I did it early on. You rush things. You want to get in a hurry. You get excited about stuff. And if you can take a breath and financially afford it, and then you're in a position where you can say, hey, let's hold on to this for a season. Let's hold on to it throughout the summer. Let's hold on to it through the winter, whatever. Your reputation, your customer base, everyone is going to appreciate your product so much more if you can work out those details. It's a hard thing to do. I mean, there's guys that, you know, you go through that prototyping process, you spend $700-800, or even if it's $40-50 on do-it molds and you buy 8 different do-it molds as you're chopping them up with your Dremels and putting high temp silicone in it, trying to maneuver this thing. I mean, take the time because it's worth it. And you can, I mean, the do-it process you and I had talked about in our phone call. I mean, the do-it process, I'm a huge believer in the do-it products. The head styles and the designs that they have out nowadays really afford you the ability, if you're patient, to modify and create so many custom things, whether it be your own Alabama rigs or your own swing heads or underspins or anything else. I mean, there's an endless possibilities that are out there, and they're available for $50, which is just insane. I mean, at least it allows you the ability to concept something out and work through that process. So, I mean, on the encouragement side to any other builders that are out there, I mean, I know it's hard when you're coming up with something new and you see a niche or you see something that the industry is lacking. It's hard not to immediately have that knee-jerk reaction and be patient with it, because it's a hard thing too. I mean, you're too patient, someone else jumps on it, and so
it is hard. And you know, it's funny because the one thing I've kind of learned too, you know, so for me it's kind of unique because like I'm not, so my tribe of friends in the jig making game that have companies is growing tremendously, right? Just from Jig Squad. But the thing is, before Jig Squad, it was like I had a lot of friends that were just jig makers and they weren't selling and things like that. So it, you know, it's kind of been a learning experience for me where, you know, I knew plenty of people in the industry, but you know, jig makers and small jig making companies, that's what I didn't know as much of. And now that's kind of like the bread and butter of Jig Squad. So, and I keep hearing that story repeated over and over again. And, you know, it's funny because like it's challenged me, Flint, frankly, to even ask some questions. I'm like, hey, what can I make? What am I willing to make? What is an imitation of somebody else's stuff? And, you know, right, wrong, or in between. And other people could think that and not agree with me. But for me, I'm like a home crafter. That's how I look at it. And I don't sell jigs, and I haven't. And if I ever did, it wouldn't mean selling somebody else's thing, right? And so that was the kind of parameter that I set moralistically for myself on kind of how I did it. And I, you know, listen, if you're out there and you think I'm hitting on you, whatever, that's your own problem. I'm just straight up saying this is me. This is kind of how I think about it. And like everyone makes those decisions. And design is an amazing thing. You know, it's funny. I said to my wife the other day, and this isn't even about a jig. I made the comment. I said, you know, I said in the last week, you know, I made a big push for myself about having communications with some different people about pre-planning for shows. And like, I'm talking like into October, you know what I mean? Like, that's how far ahead that I'm planning and doing things. But what that also, and guys, this is just a little behind the scenes of Jig Squad. Like, it's crazy because it involves like checking in on the person you're inviting, right? I do my homework. I didn't contact Flint here and not know that he was originally from the Northwest. I already knew that. Why? Because I did my homework. You know, I do my homework. I find out about a company. I decide whether I think they're slapsticks or not. You know, like I do all these things. And then in addition to that, there's the communication end, you know, calling people, making sure they're able to get set up and able to get on, and audio and video. And then there's doing the graphics. And after all these things are said and done, sometimes I just take a breath and I go, all right, I'm done for the day, or I don't want to do anymore, because the amount of time I spend in doing design work, making cool stickers and stuff, it's tremendous. And so I understand it now from what the companies and what you guys that do have companies go through and experience, because it's all consuming and managing your own social media and all these other marketing and branding things. It's a tremendous amount of work. And so I my hat's off to you. And the creation end is just extraordinary, right? Like the cyclops. I'm so sorry, dude. You guys listen, Battle Baits, they have the coolest jigs in the entire world. He's got to, you know what, Flint? You got to just start holding some up and showing them because, you know, otherwise I'm going to start talking to cyclops. I'm never going to get to it.
Backstory one too. Cyclops is weird.
And it's weird, and I love it, dude.
It's really weird. So the cyclops, the cyclops originally started as a punch jig, probably 6 or 7 years ago, maybe longer. So the way that the cyclops started was we had chaser rigs that we fished in the ocean.
Okay.
But my brother's a chief in the Coast Guard, and he was stationed in Florida, and he was fishing king mackerel and out of his kayak, and he was all around doing that. And they had big teasers that they would fish in front of mackerel, and I don't know. I hope I'm not jacking this part of it up.
No, go ahead, dude.
They would troll at a certain speed, and they would have these teasers. So at the time, I was trying to develop a punch head that was a skirted punch head, not reinventing the game by any means, but at the time, I was modifying a poison tail, do it mold, and I had taken it to this machinist, and I was trying to get this head completely straight and running rods through it to make it this poison tail punch head that could be skirted that I could flip with.
Okay.
And like I said, not the newest concept out there. Revenge was doing one at the time. It wasn't skirted, but it was a real lifelike fish punch head. And I loved that concept, but I also liked the ability to tie on it. So I was working with my brother who was in Florida on this thing, and I'm sending him some stuff out. And he's like, man, what if you put an underspin on this thing so these kings could have some flash associated with it? So we started laying wire in these do-it molds, cutting it out, doing all this stuff. And I mean, just the most awful looking baits you've ever seen that I was sending out to him, and he was catching kings on them. But it was a big 1 ounce punch head that was
1 ounce. Okay.
And because the way they had to modify the mold to make it flat on the back and then have the nose of the bait go through with the center pin that I could line through on it, they had to build it out and still have a collar. So it was about 1 ounce, and he's trolling with it with a mackerel behind it, and then there's a wire coming out of the bottom with this underspin on it. And
wait till you guys see this thing.
And that's not what I'm showing because that thing was so jacked up. But ultimately, it started down the lines in my mind of, we can adjust the weight of a bait by adding weight on the line, just like a Carolina rig, and not have to change the end profile of said bait. So he ended up working wires that were hanging off the line and ultimately having a spinner coming out of the back of this punch head. And it was like this real rough cyclops. And it basically just went on the back burner forever.
Okay.
And I don't know, fast forward 3-4 years, I'm building at the time. I'm building my normal underspin.
Okay.
So I developed and designed this one, and I love this underspin because the way that I built this one, I wanted to be able to have it flat on the bottom so I could kill the bait and just have it ride. And
Okay.
so I worked on this bait for a long time, but the only thing I didn't like about this bait was that it limited what trailer you could use. Because obviously when you're pouring, you're either throwing a 4-aught or a 5-aught or a 6-aught, and that was going to determine how big of a swim bait. I couldn't throw, this is a 3/8 ounce, I couldn't throw a 2/8 Kitech on the back of this.
Right. I get what you're saying.
And I couldn't throw a 5/8 Kitech on the back of this. There wouldn't be enough. And so it limits what swim bait you're using. I mean, this is a little 4-inch swammer by X-Zone that's on this one, but
Great bait, by the way.
X-Zone's an awesome company. So I get here and we're fishing winter. I moved here December of 20. Well, it's been a year and a half.
And here, for anyone wondering, is Branson, Missouri.
Yeah.
Right?
And we move out here and we're fishing channel swing cedar trees, and they're in 35, 40 feet of water. Treetops and spots, smallies are all suspended on it. And they're feeding on tiny, tiny little bait fish, 2-inch shad. And so trying to get ball heads and swim bait heads down 35, 40 feet and run these cedar tops, we were either having to wait so long and count these baits down to have a small enough profile, I should say, so a 1/0 hook and an 1/8 ounce or a 32nd or a quarter even.
Oh God.
So
I'm getting excited.
I know, I'm sorry. So
no, go ahead. I love it. I think the build-up is everything I want it to be.
Okay.
I'm so excited to buy some of these things.
So I'm fishing with my cousins, and I'm fortunate. So I have 2 cousins that live here. They're both guides on Table Rock, unbelievably knowledgeable. And so I kind of presented this idea to them. And like, if you were able to rig something weedless and fish, a 1/2 ounce all the way down to 40 and run it in front of a 2-inch on a 1/0 bait, would you be able to do it? So I started drawing it up, and ultimately, so
hold on, I got to make you big now.
I know. So this can be, and this is a little bit bigger. Like I said, I was rushed coming home. This is, I think it's a 3/5 swim bait. This is a Combat Lures. But ultimately, so here's your underspin. And your underspin, reason for the cyclops. Sorry.
No, it's good, dude. We see it fine.
Okay. Is obviously it has one eye. But it goes, you thread it directly on your line, and then you put a bobber stop on, and then you run it directly to whatever swim bait hook. So this is a 1/0, and this was one that I had with a little 2-inch Kitech. And the thing I loved about it so much was the fact that I could run as small a plastic as deep as I possibly wanted. I mean, we had wind come up, we could peg 2 of these like in front of each other like this and run them. And there's something about when you're prototyping around swim baits and the plastic game, I absolutely love the way certain plastics run unobstructed from weighted jig heads or weighted hooks. So you have
that's a great comment, dude.
It's so weird and it's so different. I mean, you hear a lot of people talk about different swim bait heads and you have to have this degree bend,
right,
for your jig head to get this tighter wobble. I mean, anyone that follows the hookup tackle, they talk about that all the time with everything coming out of JDM. Well, with a 23-degree line tie, you're going to have even a tighter shimmy. An unobstructed swim bait.
How does it keel? How does it track? Does it blow out? How all those things are, wow, dude.
So to be able to, originally I designed it. Now that I have been sitting here messing with it, I originally designed it with the purpose that it was going to slide down and be right on that tie point. And
so, Flint, let me ask you a question. So, not only will the blade will spin, right? It's easy. The blade, that's easy to figure out. Will the Cyclops thing, is it just penduluming down and weighted and swinging back and forth a little bit, or will it actually rotate?
No, it won't. It won't.
It won't, because it's the weight of it will keep it down. You'll get a slight back and forth type of movement, right? Retrieving it, I would bet.
Yeah, and that was a little bit of the design with it, because I've got to get. So I know there's going to be a bunch of people watching this, so
the magic.
I'll call myself out so that no one else calls me out in the comments later. So probably 4 years ago. 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, Decoy came out with something very, very similar.
Yeah, Matt in chat was just saying that, similar, right?
Yep. So and I can't remember if it was called the Blade Runner or something to that effect. Very slim profile, and we were joking, my brother and I, when we saw it, we were like, man, this is super along the lines of the same concept you were fishing kings. Yeah. And he said, well, try it and see if there's any validity to it. And I got him and I fished him out in Southern Oregon. And it's a cool concept. I mean, good design. The things that I didn't like about it personally, just from a builder perspective, there was an internal there was like an internal plastic sleeve, and I understand why they do it, because obviously they don't want your line to rub on lead, and they weren't finishing their lead. It was just an unpainted thing, but it was very streamlined. So you would reel it and it would do the exact same thing, but it would come just straight through the water. And I always liked about the way that we were doing it with these kings was having this larger bulge weight. And my brother is going to make fun of me in these comments based on that, what I just said. But the fact that it created this side to side wobble, and that was a lot of the ball design on the base of this. Was that you were getting that effect, almost like reeling a bobber through the water.
Yes.
Of that real erratic wobble side to side. And so when I started designing that, it was the first week that I was here in Branson. We went out and fished, and the decoy bait never really caught traction in the US. And I thought, gosh, it's so, I mean, it's same concept. And it is, I knew that, I'm like, man, I got to take my time on this thing. I got to do it right. I got to figure out the internals of it. I got to figure out a way, because I'm making everything out of lead, that I have to make that line through to where there's no way that it's going to nick the line. So I worked with sleeves for a while. I worked with little plastic inserts, and ultimately I was able to develop this system where I would actually powder coat it and then use these rods to powder coat the inside of the line through, and it's just been incredibly smooth ever since. But ultimately I wanted to change that basis of that design to where it was going to have a little bit of swing side to side as it was tracking. And ultimately the way that I found the most success on this, like I said, I was in my mind when I was designing it, I wanted it right here on the bait.
Right.
But as time went on, I fish it 3 or 4 inches in front of a bait.
Like the saltwater teaser stuff that you're talking about, though. Yes.
Well, and like I said, that the fact that a swim bait can swim unobstructed on a hook 40 feet down and swim freely the results were just incredible. I mean, and the fact that we could place a 1/0 or a size 1 extra wide gap hook with a 2-inch little Kitech down 40 feet and fish it just as effectively on a half-ounce rig.
Do you know where I'm going to use those? I kid you not. That thing excites me for smallmouth. I'll be honest with you, but I'm more excited about it in using that in the surf for whatever, being a mackerel off the beach, snook off the beach. Not as much snook, because when I'm fishing snook, they're closer on the trowel. But anything surf fishing, I'm excited to use that, throwing like diesel minnows and stuff like that off the beaches. And I like the idea of pegging it further up. What's crazy about it is it almost reminds me, well, it doesn't remind me of this, but it makes me think, like if I had a Carolina rig and I was just going to retrieve the Carolina rig and not have it in. But the thing is, I like the pegging is great, but the cool thing is that blade underneath, even though it's a willow on that, it still provides some lift. So it's almost kind of like you've got this free floating capability of the bait, which is fantastic. And there's so many baits out there that are keeled differently, and you'll get different shimmy of how it works. And without the jig head, it opens up like a whole nother world of understanding baits and plastic swim baits and how those might function without the head forward weight on a traditional jig head. That I just want to experiment with these things. That's what excites me.
Well, and it's weird. I mean, when I released it, I had a very mixed reaction and crowd from people. And you get a lot of people that are like, well, why not just throw a flashy swimmer with it? And
right,
that's a great idea as well. The reason is not to replace an existing underspin. I mean, flashy swimmer is incredible.
Something totally new. I love the concept because it's different.
Well, and I have a cult following on these. I mean, it's a completely different thing. And like I said, being fishing hydrilla, fishing grass, I'll throw one of those all day long. And they allow me to rip it. There was a couple different places on the Columbia that I just absolutely loved killing a swim bait and having it ride and lay like this on the bottom with the tail up.
Right.
Be able to kill a swim bait and have it present that way still and draw bites with it. But it's a completely different concept altogether. And
sure,
I'm not trying to replace a flashy swimmer or any other underspin for that matter. I mean,
but it's different. It's different.
There's a million awesome underspins out there and swim bait heads out there, and I think they all have a purpose. I'm not knocking on anybody. I just think that being able to throw it in front of a citizen or
a citizen,
a 2-inch Kitech down 40 feet without having to change the harness aspect is unique. And
it's a big deal. Yeah.
And I mean, I've had people that have reached out to me and they said, man, I love throwing a swim a swim bait on it, and we were actually out fishing, and it got into night, and we put a Colorado blade on it, and we started fishing big worms, and we started ripping it with big worms and just fishing as a basically as a Texas rig. And we're like, man, we're hammering it with it, opposed to anything we had bullet weight base. And so, I mean, I think that there is a lot of different applications.
Sure. What about weight options, Flint? What weight options are in that?
So right now I have an 1/8 ounce.
Okay.
A 1/4 ounce, a 3/8 ounce, and a 1/2 ounce.
Okay. So these are available now. So Will Junkin's asking, are these available now? And that's a yes, correct?
They are. And since being on the podcast, I've had 2 orders pop up on my phone. So that's probably why.
Did you really?
Yeah. So I don't know what people are buying. I don't know if they're jumping on that one, or
dude, take a couple out of stock so I can get them.
I will.
Talk about this. Anthony's talking about cadence that works best. So what have you found? Does it change depending on the weight of the plastic bait that you're throwing on the back end of this?
You know, I've thrown it on a whole bunch of different baits. Table Rock's unique for me. Being where I was located in Southern Oregon, with Shasta the exception, we didn't really have shad. Our big forage base was gill stuff.
Okay.
Now being here and seeing just an overabundance of really small shad and fish being on really small shad, I've predominantly thrown it with a 2-inch Kitech. And for the most part, I'm fishing it. I've caught fish in a foot of water with it, banging banks, and I've caught fish 45, 50 feet deep that are channel swings, main lake points. And the cool part about it is I really haven't found, being that it's a line through bait, you really, the only thing that really limits you is working a bait so slow or so fast that it's going to foul the action that swim bait would naturally have.
You're going to learn things about your plastic swim baits that you never knew before, of how they keel, how they roll. Where does the predominant amount of the action change to? So if it's not with a weight forward ball head or swim bait head, what does the bait do? How is it weighted? And a lot of baits, you're going to learn a lot. I mean, I think it's such an interesting concept, and one that I'm going to promote the heck out of. You guys, hey, and for the record, there's no, I got no deal going on any of this. I'm just telling you, like always, this is what I think is my jam, right? I think this thing is one of the coolest things going. And it's just something new, you know, like I don't know. A free floating swim bait on smaller sized plastic swim baits. Come on, man. This is the juice right here.
And it is so, it's so weird when you're, I mean, I remember I 100% admit when I was prototyping it, I was like, man, I'm pegging that thing all the way down to the base of it so it runs. You know, I designed it with a certain amount of drop so that it would go right on the hook, and it would be like this one attached underspin piece.
I wanted 12 to 18 inches ahead of that thing.
And I take someone out fishing and I show them the first time, and I slide it on, I slide the bobber stop on, I tie a hook on, I give him the rod, and I start fishing, and he goes, man, this thing's pretty cool. And he's swimming it in the water on the side of the boat, and he'd never slid the bobber stop down to the floor. So
you just
it's like a foot in front of this swim bait. And I'm like, dude,
He was
that
getting
looks
bit.
so much better than mine, right? And
That's so great.
But you could tell just having that weight interact with that tie point on that hook was causing that hook or that swim bait to act different than that swim bait unobstructed. And it was just such a weird realization when I saw it. And, you know, like I said, I think we're all fans to a certain degree, may not be a durability of Kitech, but their design, X-Zone's the same way. There's a million plastic companies that are come out with some phenomenal swim baits, but you can kill a an action with a head.
Sure.
And to watch some of those, if they're paired on the right hook, to watch some of those swim baits swim freely.
Yeah, interesting.
It is amazing. And to think that concept is continuing 40 feet deep, and those fish are maybe not seeing that presentation before, it's pretty cool.
So great, buddy.
So,
well, listen, so here I get caught up on these things. So
I know
I don't want to keep you forever, but I want you to have a chance to show a couple of the other jigs. And I did flash you guys, for everyone in chat, if you're watching on replay or if it's on the podcast platforms, the links to Battle Baits, it's battlebaits.com. So relatively simple, and Instagram are all there. You could follow along. So it's just, guys, I'm telling you, the color combinations and just some of the jigs are extraordinary. You know what we're gonna have to do, Flint? I'm gonna have to wind up getting you on another time, because I feel like there's so much more to talk about. We're gonna have to do another round sometime.
I know, and that's, I feel terrible. I feel like I haven't even talked about jigs, and but that's, I think that's to a certain degree my mentality, and why I have so many different products opposed to just jigs. It's because exactly what we talked about. I mean,
yeah,
as concepts and thoughts evolve, and you see niches and you see different ways of presenting baits, it's easy to expand on conversations, and it's easy to expand on product lines. And
well, we can't end on the Cyclops. We've got to at least, I want you to highlight one or two of your favorite jigs that you got there, and we at least gotta go back to some of those, because
oh my goodness,
yeah, I mean, there's just some phenomenal stuff.
So I'd be completely lying if I didn't say that I didn't just throw up that board in preparation for this podcast.
That's so great.
I'm like, man, I just got to have something that looks good in the background while I'm talking here.
It looks fantastic.
You got a big barracuda, and I got a blank wall. So
do you know the story about this? So
no.
I literally, there's two. I'm working on the lab down in the basement, and it's there, and I work down there, but I don't have it all set up where I want it for like the show. And I literally take these two pictures off the wall in our bedroom every time I'm doing the podcast. And I take this barracuda, it's in our family room downstairs on this vaulted ceiling wall. And I take the barracuda down and I bring it up and hang it up every show. So when the show's over, I take the barracuda down and put the pictures back up.
Yeah, well,
but anyway, go ahead.
As soon as we get off, I have to walk all this stuff back downstairs and put it back in my inventory. You know,
so we're very similar tonight, buddy.
It's so what I actually have up here and what I probably want to show are two.
All right, let's do it.
Well, let's see what I got. I mean, I grabbed. See, the problem is I keep expanding. I have the drop shot jig. I have a finesse jig. I have a football jig. I have a swim jig. I have a brush jig. I have a bladed swim jig variant. I have
buzz baits.
I have two different buzz baits. I know I'm an idiot. Why, as a single man company, you would think that one buzz bait would be enough.
You are busy, brother. You are busy.
Let alone two. I know. And the buzz bait I just actually released the buzz bait this last week, and that's been a concept that's been a long time coming. I've had a traditional buzz bait design for a really long time.
Okay.
I can probably pop a couple of them out of the package. But
People love all this, buddy. They like seeing all these things.
I've had a traditional buzz bait, and this was actually my very first mold that I actually had custom built.
Okay.
So that's been a really, really long time ago. But just a regular, pretty standard buzz bait design.
Nice.
With a clacker.
I like the blade on the back, the willow.
Sorry. So yeah, I mean, and that's a whole nother discussion. You know, because everyone's like, gosh, why another blade, right? And you know, I'm sure there's some cosmetic aspects to it as well, but really the whole theory behind the rear blade was to create drag so that the buzz bait would never keel one side or the other in the water while you're varying speeds. Is that it almost to a certain degree acts like a windsock and drags the bait back. So
I never heard anyone describe it that way, but design wise, it totally makes sense.
Well, I know, but it's funny because I do get that message a lot, and people are like, "Do you think with all that stuff going on, you're going to throw a little 3-inch or number 3 willow on the back of it, and that's going to be the one that makes it bite?" So I'm not selling it based on the fact that that's going to be the one that's going to make a bass commit to it, but the idea and concept behind it was that it allows that bait stability, basically.
Makes sense.
So we're not even talking about jigs, we're talking about all sorts of other bladed on Jigsquad, man. I'm terrible.
Hey buddy, listen, I love it all. It all falls in the same realm. There's some lead head on that buzzbait or something similar.
There is. And I know that, you know, before we started this, you and I had talked a lot about just based on the audience and the group of guys and the jig builders that follow, that it's a unique conversation, and it's a good conversation to have about the process of getting molds made and getting, you know, taking those next steps. And there's a lot of builders that are not wanting to do that.
Right.
You try Colorado?
Yeah, you see that Matt's asking, did you try any other blades before deciding on that willow?
I've tried Colorado. I felt like the willow was more consistent. The Colorado was cool because the Colorado would occasionally slap if it was riding on the back of the shell of that Colorado. Occasionally you would have a slap, but I felt more of a consistent keel.
Makes sense.
Spinning. I felt, but it was more erratic with the Colorado as well. So
interesting.
And I have had people say, "Hey, you know, I'm going to order 3 American Shad buzz baits. Can you switch them over to Colorado on the back?" And you know, it was the design aspect was to prevent it from keeling to the side, but there's also a uniqueness to having a Colorado that occasionally is running and then slaps over. So
sure,
I did. Yes, absolutely.
Interesting.
So this is, like I said, not just my own spin on stuff. Inline buzzbait. This was the newest. Sorry.
Look at the head on that. It's beautiful.
I'm new at this. So, and the head design is kind of cool. It was something that I actually have a picture of it over on that wall. It was in the back of a notebook that I had drawn out working graveyard in the middle of the night in the back of my work notebook for a design on a spinnerbait.
Very cool.
7 years ago or 6 years ago. And thank you very much. And then became one of those staples. So it was like, well, I need to roll it into a swim jig. I need to roll it into. So I've stayed consistent on that head design.
So that head design is the same as the swim jig heads you have, right?
It is, yeah. So
and it's a phenomenal head. Hold that up again, and I know it's on the buzzbait, but guys, this is on. You have to go look at the website and just look at the head designs. And then what's Flint, what's the underside? Is it the same on the buzzbait? Is it there you go. I wanted to see what's on the underside. So it's with a wire keeper.
Yeah, and that has been one thing that
No, you're good.
That I've done on everything. When you and I talked about do it molds and starting out, and
sure.
That was the first thing that I did to every single one of my do it molds was
put wire keepers
modify them to a wire keeper. And I think that was something that was just ingrained in my head. Like I said, coming out here, fishing table rock, I'd get in a boat with my cousins and I would listen to them.
Sure.
We got to put super glue on this. We got to jam it up, man. We need a wire keeper on this thing. This is long before I'm building.
Right.
And so like I'd go to Bass Pro and I'd look at the package. Oh, this thing's junk. It doesn't have a wire keeper. So it was like always this thing in the back of my head that if I ever built something, it needed to have a wire keeper. And so I've never got away from it. And it's been something that's probably not the smartest thing to do as you're trying to ramp up production, because there is a added cost on the front end of production, but more so than anything else is there's a huge time increase when you're pouring them. And and that's the biggest drawback, I guess. But at the same time, I think the benefit far outweighs the time added. So
I agree. I mean, I think even like just on the hobbyist end for myself, my own designs, if it comes to modifying molds, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the easiest modifications to make, right? To add in a wire keeper. And if it's not if it's not the 400 size, you could always go up to the 800 size. And then of course you can make your own customs, right?
Yep.
But I mean, it's one of the easiest things to do. And I think it's valuable. Like if I was looking at buzzbaits and then you showed me or a jig and I see a wire, I want the wire keeper. I just do.
Well, and I know that it's a split field, because I know that there's a lot of people that love the screw lock, opposed to the wire keeper. And the screw lock's phenomenal.
It is.
I'm not one of those.
I mean, and a lot of guys like Z-Man Plastics, and it's not ideal to use. You can make it work, but it's not ideal with the Elastec or a lot of other brands are coming out with licensing type plastics similar to Z-Man now too. So it's not ideal, right? And I don't know what else to say.
I actually have, without letting the cat out of the bag too much, I have some baits right now that are in prototype testing, whatever, that are screw lock. So I think that there's applications for it 100%. And I'm not one of those guys that's going to say that my way's any better than somebody else's. I think there's so many ways to skin a cat, and there's some phenomenal concepts behind a lot of different people's theories, and that's why we have a cool industry.
Yeah. So Flint, we're about to hit 2 hours, so we're gonna get out of here in a sec. But let's answer this question, because I know this is something. You guys, if you want to see, Flint's got a cool little video on Instagram, kind of reviewing the battle box, and then the question Will is asking, what is the battle box, and then when will it be available again?
So the battle box is, I have one hanging up behind me and it's empty. I put it up on display just to fill the background during this video. So the battle box is something that I came up with. It's 4 years ago. I was working and I got approached by a monthly subscription box, and I basically said, hey, I'm doing battle baits part-time. I don't have enough opportunity to build, 400 baits for your box. And that same week I got approached by 3 different subscription companies, and ultimately the bottom line that I kept getting hit was, hey, we'll take your stuff that you have backstock of and you don't think you're going to sell. And it kind of just rubbed me the wrong way. And I thought, you know what?
You can do your own.
Well, and put out stuff that people want. And
yeah.
And I don't know. I think that I have a passion for fishermen, and if I'm selling something, I want to believe in it, and I don't want to send something out that is because I've made up too many of them and they're not selling.
Right.
And so I bought these boxes like 4 years ago, and I moved 2 different houses in that time period. So I'm lugging these big giant boxes, around 1,000 of them that I bought.
Sure.
And it was last Christmas. I'm like, you know what? I need to start these because I'm getting approached by a bunch of people's wives saying, hey, what do I buy for my husband? And it was cool because as a builder, as a designer, I have so many different baits that I want to push out, but they're too time consuming. And it's like a rainbow trout that I brought up earlier. If I'm having to split silicone tabs into 9 different sections to create this rainbow trout pattern, is that going to be wise for me to bring that pattern to the website, to where maybe I'm tying one of those to another 3 Okeechobee craw patterns? So I'm trying to increase my production, but I love those colors, and a lot of silicone that I've had built or custom surrounding some of those colors. So the battle box kind of has allowed me the opportunity to continue to be creative in the sense to where I'm like, you know what, I'm going to put out, if I'm doing prop heads, I want to do prop heads in the golden shiner. So I'm going to load the battle boxes with the golden shiner. I'm going to do them swim jigs with the rainbow trout, where I don't have those on my website. So the battle box is kind of a way for me to expand my creativity side and put some of those really unique hard colors. And
cool. Very cool.
And I'm hoping to have one in July. Then I've been so darn busy, but it's a great problem to have, and I'm super, super thankful. The one thing that I can say is, if you're on the website or you go on the website and you saw it say out of stock, just hit the back in stock notification, put your email in, because as soon as I put them back, it'll send you an email right away and say, hey, 15 of these are available, and they go really quick.
Well, buddy,
man, I'm sorry.
No, listen, I loved all of it, man. And I will tell you this, Flint, I 100% am telling you that I want to get you back on again. Maybe after we get a little further into the fall, when the weather starts changing, or as we hit towards winter, I'd love to get you on again, and we could talk for hours, man. It's so much fun.
I tell you, I'm going to get you some of these. We'll talk after this podcast is done.
Okay.
But I want to get you some stuff in your hands,
sure,
so
buddy.
You can sit there and look at it, and we can talk together.
Yeah, absolutely. But I appreciate you so much. Everyone, listen, check out Battle Baits. Whether you can, if you're watching on replay, if you're watching on the podcast, check out the Instagram. Flint posts some. Oh, we didn't even get to talk about pictures. We'll get to that another time. Some amazing pictures, some graphics. But definitely check out Battle Baits, because there's some really cool stuff, and a lot of diverse types of jigs that you can get from them too. So, but a phenomenal designer. Flint, it was awesome, buddy. I appreciate having you. You guys, everyone in chat, thank you guys. We'll see you. Listen, I'm going to throw this out there so you notice. Tomorrow morning, there's going to be a couple of announcements from Jig Squad. So there's going to be another show. I know I go every other week, but we're going to do another show next Thursday. And it's going to be a special show. It's going to be a surprise show. And the surprise is coming out tomorrow morning. So look for that on Instagram. You'll see it posted there. But anyway, I thank you for being here tonight. Check out Battle Baits. Flint, stay in StreamYard with me when I end this. But you guys, I love you all. Peace.